How's your heart today? Some people are easy to understand because they speak their feelings out loud. And some people leave you to learn their love backwards, years later, through memory, routine, and the small things they kept doing when no one was watching. Tonight's letters are about fathers who rarely opened their hearts in words, but somehow built care into daily life anyway. If you grew up with a father who did not say much, but still shaped the feeling of home, maybe these words will find you gently. Let's begin with the first letter. I used to think my father and I had nothing to say to each other. We lived in the same house, sat at the same dinner table, and shared the same last name, but our conversations were usually made of practical things. What time are you leaving? Did you finish your homework? Take an umbrella. Lock the door. Don't forget your lunch. My mother was the person who asked how I felt. My father asked if the ceiling fan in my room was still making that clicking noise. When I was younger, I thought that meant he cared more about broken things than people. He noticed when a hinge was loose, when the car sounded wrong, when the fence needed paint. But if I came home tired or upset, he never sat me down and said, "Tell me what's going on." He might look at me for half a second and ask, "Everything okay?" But if I said yes, he let the answer stand. Back then, I used to wish he would push more. I wanted some movie version of a father, a long talk in the kitchen, a hand on my shoulder, a sentence I could remember forever. Instead, I got habits. Every winter morning, before school, my father started the car early so the windshield would clear before I got in. When it rained, my umbrella would already be by the front door, standing open in the sink if it had been folded away damp the day before. If I had a big exam, there was usually cut fruit in the fridge and a granola bar placed on the counter as if it had appeared by accident. None of it looked emotional enough to count. Then I moved out. The first thing I noticed was how many small things no longer happened unless I did them myself. Nobody checked whether my tires looked low. Nobody replaced the kitchen bulb before it fully died. Nobody noticed that the front step had become slippery after it rained. I came home one night and realized I had been living with a dripping faucet for 3 weeks because I was too busy to deal with it. At my parents' house, that kind of problem would have disappeared before I had time to be annoyed by it. One Saturday, my father came over because I casually mentioned the faucet on the phone. He arrived with a toolbox, a bag from the hardware store, and the quiet seriousness he always wears when something needs attention. He fixed the faucet in 15 minutes. Then he noticed the cabinet door under my sink was crooked. Then he tightened a chair leg. Then he checked the smoke detector battery. Then he stood in my kitchen looking into my fridge and said, "You need food that turns into meals." I laughed because that was easier than saying thank you. When he left, the apartment felt calmer. Not because it was cleaner or newer, but because someone had moved through it with care. Someone had noticed the places where life catches and makes you tired. That was the first time I understood that my father's love had always lived in maintenance. He wasn't ignoring me. He was trying to reduce friction around me. He was saying, in the only language that felt natural to him, "I want your life to work. I want your door to lock properly. I want your car to start. I want your shower not to leak into the wall. I want you to walk into your week with one less thing falling apart." Once I saw that, old memories changed shape. The year I had to give a speech at school and could barely eat from nerves, he didn't tell me to be confident. He sharpened 2 pencils, packed an extra pen, and left $10 in my bag, in case the cafeteria line is too long. At the time, I thought he was missing the point. Now I think he understood the point better than I did. He knew he couldn't remove fear, but he could make sure fear didn't arrive with extra problems attached. Dad, I used to think silence meant distance. I thought because we never had long emotional talks, there was a part of me you did not really know. But the older I get, the more I see your attention in places I once overlooked. You knew which shoes needed resoling, which route was safer at night, which month my registration expired. You loved me by noticing what could make life harder and getting there first. You were never loud about it, but you were always there, holding the structure steady. Some fathers don't say, "I love you," in a way the room can hear. They say it in all the things that keep the room from breaking. Sometimes understanding arrives years after the love itself. And sometimes the delay is part of growing up. Here is the next letter. For most of my life, I thought my father was hard to read. He was not angry. He was not cruel. He was just careful. Careful with words. Careful with money. Careful with expectations. At family gatherings, he was the one refilling cups, carrying folding chairs, checking the grill, making sure everyone had a ride home. He was always doing something, which meant he rarely sat still long enough to say much. As a teenager, I found that frustrating. I wanted emotional clarity and got instructions instead. If I was anxious, he asked whether I had slept enough. If I was heartbroken, he asked whether my car had enough gas. If I had a terrible week, he offered to change my brake pads. It felt like he kept stepping sideways whenever feelings came into the room. Then I had my first real breakup. Not the dramatic kind. Just the quiet adult kind where nobody becomes the villain, but everything in your body still feels displaced afterward. I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday because I didn't want to be alone with my own thoughts. My mother hugged me. She asked if I wanted tea. My father looked up from the newspaper, took one quick look at my face, and said, "Leave your keys on the counter." I almost felt offended. My heart was on the floor and he wanted my keys. An hour later, I looked out the window and saw him in the driveway checking my tires. Then he topped up the windshield fluid. Then he opened the hood and stood there for a while, looking at things I didn't understand. When he came back inside, he washed his hands, sat down across from me, and said, "You don't need extra problems when you're already tired." I still think that might be the closest he has ever come to telling me he knew exactly how bad I felt. That sentence stayed with me because it taught me something I had never been able to name. My father did feel deeply. He just seemed to believe feelings were private, while care should be visible. He didn't always know how to enter pain through conversation, so he entered through usefulness. After that, I started noticing the details. Before long drives home, the gas tank was full before I even asked to borrow the car. If heavy rain was forecast, he called me and kept the whole conversation on weather, traffic, exits, and road conditions, somehow staying on the phone exactly as long as it took for my chest to loosen. When I was visiting one winter, I came downstairs at dawn and found a cup of coffee on the table made exactly the way I like it, plus a grocery bag with crackers, oranges, and the mint gum I always buy before trips. He never announced any of this. He just set things in place and moved on. Maybe that is why it took me so long to recognize how specifically he knew me. He knew which side of my neck tightens when I'm stressed. He knew I hate driving when I'm hungry. He knew I get quieter, not louder, when I'm overwhelmed. He knew I don't ask for help until something has already become too much. One evening, years later, my partner said something that changed the way I think about him. I was complaining that my father and I never really talked about feelings, and she said, "Maybe you have. Maybe you just keep waiting for him to use your vocabulary." That irritated me at first, but then I thought about the full tank. The coffee, the tightened brakes, the weather calls, the way he stands by the front window until everyone gets home. Maybe being understood is not always the same as being asked a beautiful question. Maybe sometimes it looks like someone memorizing your needs so quietly that you mistake their accuracy for routine. Dad, I spent years believing you saw the outline of my life but not the inside of it. I was wrong. You were watching more closely than I understood. You knew my habits, my weak spots, my forms of tiredness, my ways of pretending to be fine. You just answered them in the language that was easiest for your hands. I wish I had known sooner that your practical care was not a substitute for love. It was love, concentrated into something you knew how to offer without failing at it. Some people cannot hand you their feelings neatly, so they hide them in timing, preparation, and the exact way they remember what you need. Love doesn't always become softer with age. Sometimes it becomes clearer. Here is the last letter tonight. I think I finally understood my father in the middle of the night, while holding my son in a dark hallway. He was a month old then, still knew enough that every sound felt urgent. My wife was asleep for the first time in hours. The apartment was quiet, except for the refrigerator hum and the soft, restless breathing of a baby who might wake again any second. I remember standing there with him against my shoulder, shifting my weight carefully so the floor wouldn't creak. There is a certain kind of exhaustion that strips away performance. At 2:30 in the morning, nobody is trying to be wise. You're just listening, checking, adjusting. I touched the back of his neck to see if he was too warm. I fixed the blanket. I checked the latch on the window. I looked at the monitor, even though he was right there in my arms. I moved the bottle off the edge of the counter because I imagined it falling later. None of it felt emotional. It felt automatic. And then, in the middle of that dim hallway, I had one of those quiet realizations that rearrange old memories without making any sound. I was doing exactly what my father used to do. Not the big obvious things people talk about when they talk about fathers. I mean the invisible constant scanning, the checking of doors, the listening for trouble. The strange way love makes a person alert, even when they are desperate to rest. The way your body begins solving tomorrow's inconveniences before they happen because someone else's comfort has become part of your own nervous system. Suddenly I saw my childhood differently. My father checking the locks twice before bed. My father stepping outside during storms to tie something down in the yard. My father waking early on travel days even when he wasn't the one leaving. My father walking through the house at night, switching off lights, lifting a backpack off the stairs, moving a glass away from the edge of the counter, making the path smoother for everyone else without announcing it. I used to think he was rigid, or restless, or incapable of relaxing. Now I think he was loving us in the form of vigilance. A few weeks after that hallway moment, my parents came over to visit the baby. My father held him with a level of concentration I had never seen before. He adjusted the blanket twice, asked if the car seat straps were sitting right, noticed a loose screw on the crib before I had, washed the bottles again because he thought the dishwasher maybe didn't get hot enough. My wife smiled and said, "Your dad notices everything." I almost laughed because that was both completely true and somehow still too small. Later that night, after they left, I started remembering all the times his questions had annoyed me. Where are you going? What time will you be home? Did you check your tires? Do you have cash? How bad is the weather supposed to get? I used to hear those questions as control. Sometimes maybe they did come out that way. He was not always graceful. He didn't know how to make concern sound soft. But now I understand the source of it more than the style. He loved from a place of responsibility. He loved by keeping watch. My father and I still do not have the kind of relationship where we sit down and name everything. When I call, we talk about work, traffic, prices, whether the washing machine is making a strange sound again. He asks how the baby is sleeping, whether I got the oil changed, whether the front step is still slippery after rain. But I don't believe that anymore. Because now I know how much feeling can hide inside maintenance. How much devotion can live in the repeated act of making a home safer, quieter, more reliable. How many fathers build tenderness out of preparedness, because preparedness is the one form of tenderness they trust themselves not to fumble. There is one old memory I keep returning to now. I was probably 9. I woke up on a winter morning and found my lunch packed, my wet shoes drying near the heater, the car already warming outside, and the icy steps salted before sunrise. I don't remember seeing my father do any of it. I only remember walking into a day that had already been prepared for. That, I think, was his love. Not always spoken, not always easy, not always emotionally elegant, but present in the temperature of the car, the charge in the battery, the cleared path, the checked lock, the person awake before everyone else because somebody had to think ahead. Dad, I understand you more now that I have become someone's midnight hallway. More now that I know what it feels like to love a person so much that your body keeps watch even when your words have run out. I used to think we had missed each other emotionally. Maybe in some ways we did. But I also think I was loved more thoroughly than I knew. You built your feelings into the structure of our days, and because the structure held, I did not always notice your hands there. The older I get, the more I hear you in the quiet click of a lock, the hum of a repaired thing, and the low automatic question asked by someone who is really saying, in the plainest voice possible, "Come home safe." Some people never become fluent in emotional language, but they still spend a lifetime loving others with incredible precision. If tonight reminded you of your own father, maybe what you're feeling is not only sadness for what was never said. Maybe it is gratitude catching up to a language you had to grow into before you could understand it. We do not always get the perfect conversation, but sometimes we get something else, a clearer view of the care that was there. And sometimes that understanding is its own kind of peace.